A starving artist shares her lunch with a homeless man. The thought had never crossed Eliza's mind as anything remarkable, just a simple human gesture on a bitter November afternoon when the sky hung heavy with unshed snow and her own stomach growled in protest of another month's rent paid instead of groceries bought. The sandwich she'd carefully divided wasn't much, half of the only meal she'd planned for herself that day. Store-brand peanut butter spread thin on day-old bread she'd purchased at discount. But the man with the weathered face and eyes that reminded her of faded denim had been sitting in the same spot outside her apartment building for 3 days now, his cardboard sign growing damp at the edges from the persistent mist. Eliza's fingers trembled slightly as she approached him, not from fear but from the familiar lightheadedness of skipping too many meals. Her art supplies weighed heavy in her worn canvas bag, brushes that needed replacing and paints she rationed like precious gems. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, extending half of her sandwich wrapped in a paper napkin. No ceremony, no expectation of gratitude, just one hungry soul recognizing another. The man looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something deeper. Not quite suspicion, but the cautious consideration of someone who had learned that gifts often came with expectations attached. His gloved fingers, the tips cut off exposing reddened skin, hesitated before accepting her offering. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but gentle, like stones tumbling in a distant river. "Been a while since someone looked me in the eye, let alone shared their lunch." Eliza nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. In the 3 years since moving to the city to pursue her art, she'd become intimately familiar with the sensation of being invisible. Gallery owners who looked through her rather than at her work, former classmates whose eyes skimmed past her at industry events. Even her own reflection sometimes seemed to belong to a stranger, a girl who had once believed that passion and talent were enough to build a life upon. "I'm Eliza," she said simply, settling beside him on the cold concrete, leaving appropriate space between them. She unwrapped her own half of the sandwich and took a small bite, savoring it. The luxury of eating slowly was one she rarely indulged in these days. "Marcus," he replied after a moment, "though most people around here just call me the old man with the beard." He gestured to his salt and pepper beard with a self-deprecating smile that transformed his face, revealing glimpses of someone else, someone from before. They ate in companionable silence, watching pedestrians hurry past, heads bent against the cold, eyes fixed on destinations unknown. When Eliza finally stood to leave, her joints stiff from the cold, Marcus looked up at her with an intensity that caught her off guard. "You're an artist," he said, not a question. Eliza's hand instinctively went to the paint smudges on her sleeve, permanent residents no matter how many times she washed the threadbare fabric. "How did you know?" "Your hands," he replied. "They have stories to tell. And your eyes, you see things differently." He paused, his gaze drifting to somewhere beyond her. "I used to know someone like that. Long time ago?" Something in his tone made Eliza hesitate, curious about the life this man had lived before circumstances had placed him on this corner with a cardboard sign. But she had a shift at the diner in 30 minutes, and her manager had already warned her twice about tardiness. "Maybe I'll see you tomorrow," she said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Marcus nodded, carefully folding the napkin she had given him and tucking it into his pocket. "I'll be here. Not many places to go when you're me." The weight of his words followed Eliza as she walked away, settling somewhere between her shoulder blades. The familiar ache of recognition, of one struggling soul identifying another, pressed against her ribs. That night, as she washed dishes that belonged to strangers and served food she could scarcely afford to eat herself, Eliza found her thoughts returning to Marcus. There had been something in his eyes, a depth, an understanding, that had resonated with her. In a city of millions, it was strange how a brief connection with a stranger could feel more substantial than 3 years of networking attempts and gallery submissions. When her shift ended at midnight, Eliza's feet throbbed and her lower back ached from hours of standing. The night had turned bitter, wind slicing through her thin jacket as she made her way home. She thought of Marcus, wondering if he had found shelter from the cold. The city's homeless shelters were often full, especially on nights like these when the temperature threatened to drop below freezing. Her apartment, a converted storage space above a laundromat, welcomed her with lukewarm air and the persistent hum of washing machines below. Eliza switched on the single lamp that illuminated her space, part bedroom, part studio, all contained within 400 square feet of concrete and hope. Canvas stretched across homemade frames leaned against every available surface. Landscapes that bled into abstracts, portraits of strangers glimpsed on subway cars, and most recently, a series of hands, working hands, tired hands, hands that told stories of lives lived in the margins. Her own contribution to a world already overflowing with art that no one seemed to want. Tomorrow was her day off from the diner. Tomorrow she would paint. The thought settled like a small warm stone in her chest as she fell asleep to the rhythm of spin cycles below. Morning arrived with watery sunlight and the realization that she had dreamed of Marcus, not as he was now, but as he might have been once, standing in a room filled with light, surrounded by color and movement. The dream clung to her as she made instant coffee and stared out her single window at the slice of sky visible between buildings. Without fully forming the intention, Eliza found herself packing not only her half sandwich, but also an apple she had been saving and a small thermos of coffee. Her finances couldn't sustain feeding two, but something about Marcus had touched a place in her that had been dormant for too long, the part that remembered why she had become an artist in the first place. To connect, to see and be seen. He was there, in the same spot, his breath visible in the cold morning air. When he saw her approaching, something shifted in his posture, a straightening of shoulders, a lifting of chin. Recognition that transcended their brief encounter. "Thought you might want some coffee," Eliza said, offering the thermos. "It's not great, but it's hot." Marcus accepted it with a nod of thanks, his fingers brushing against hers in the exchange. His hands were colder than they should have been, even in November. "You came back," he said simply. "I said I would." Eliza settled beside him, offering half of her sandwich and the apple. "I have the day off. Thought I might sketch for a while if you don't mind the company." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers for something, perhaps the mockery or pity he had grown accustomed to finding in the gazes of strangers. Finding neither, he nodded slowly. "I'd welcome it," he said, his voice carrying the weight of solitude long endured. "Been a while since I had a conversation that wasn't with myself." As they shared the modest meal, Eliza pulled out her sketchbook and a piece of charcoal. Her fingers moved almost of their own accord, capturing the angles of Marcus's face, the way the morning light caught in his beard, the profound dignity that persisted despite his circumstances. "Do you mind?" she asked belatedly, realizing she hadn't sought permission. Marcus glanced at the emerging sketch and something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps of himself as seen through another's eyes. "No," he said softly. "I don't mind." As her charcoal moved across the paper, Marcus began to speak, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluidity, as if the act of being rendered visible had unlocked something within him. He spoke of a life before, a wife named Catherine who had loved morning glories and classical music, a career in finance that had consumed him, a slow descent into alcoholism after Catherine's death, the loss of everything that had once defined him. "Funny thing about falling," he said, watching Eliza's hands as they captured his likeness. "You never realize how far down the bottom is until you hit it." Eliza nodded, understanding more than he might have guessed. Her own fall had been different but no less devastating, the gradual erosion of confidence as rejection followed rejection, the slow realization that talent alone wasn't enough in a world that valued connections and marketability, the growing fear that she had sacrificed everything for a dream that would never materialize. "I still have days when I wonder if I should just give up," she admitted, the words emerging without conscious permission. "Go back home, get a real job like my parents always wanted." Marcus was silent for a moment, studying her with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "What does your art mean to you?" he asked finally. The question caught Eliza off guard, so simple yet so profound. She paused, charcoal suspended above paper. "Everything," she whispered. "It's how I make sense of the world, how I process being alive in it. Without it, I don't know who I'd be." Marcus nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "Then you can't give up," he said with quiet certainty. "Some people spend their whole lives never finding the thing that makes them feel that way." The simplicity of his statement struck Eliza with unexpected force. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back, focusing on her sketch. For 3 years, she had been waiting for external validation, for someone in the art world to recognize her talent, to tell her she belonged. And here was this man, who had lost everything, offering her the permission she hadn't realized she was seeking. Their conversation flowed easily after that, punctuated by comfortable silences as Eliza worked. When she finally closed her sketchbook, the afternoon was waning, and her fingers were stained with charcoal. "Would you like to see?" she asked, offering him the completed sketch. Marcus took it with careful hands. His expression as he looked at her rendering of him was complex, wonder mixed with a profound sadness, recognition tangled with grief. "You saw me," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "The real me, not just—" He gestured vaguely at his worn clothes, his unkempt appearance. "That's what artists do," Eliza replied. "We see what's beneath the surface." She hesitated, then carefully tore the page from her sketchbook. "It's yours if you want it." Marcus accepted the drawing with reverence, as if she had handed him something precious rather than a charcoal sketch on cheap paper. "Thank you," he said, his words weighted with meaning beyond the simple gesture. As Eliza stood to leave, a strange impulse seized her. Would you like to see my studio sometime? It's not much, just my apartment really, but I have more work there." The invitation surprised them both. For a moment, Marcus looked taken aback, then something like determination settled over his features. "I'd like that," he said. "But not yet. Not like this." He gestured to himself, his expression resolute. "When I come to see your art, I want to be more than I am right now?" Eliza wanted to tell him that he was enough exactly as he was, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she nodded, understanding the need to meet art and life on one's own terms. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said. Same time, and she was. Each day for the next 2 weeks, Eliza brought food to share and spent her break or day off sitting beside Marcus, sketching and talking. She learned about his life before, his love for architecture and jazz, his travels through Europe in his youth, the daughter in Seattle who believed him dead because it was easier than acknowledging the truth of his addiction. In turn, she shared her own stories, growing up in a small town where art was considered a hobby rather than a calling. Her first year in the city, full of naive optimism, the gradual wearing down of her spirit as reality failed to align with her dreams. The recent series she had been working on, exploring the dignity of unseen labor. On the 15th day, Marcus wasn't in his usual spot. Eliza waited for an hour, concern growing with each passing minute. The city had many dangers for those without shelter, and the winter was deepening its hold, temperatures dropping dangerously low at night. She returned the next day and the next, but Marcus remained absent. By the 4th day, a hollow ache had settled in her chest, the particular grief of losing someone whose place in your life defied conventional categories. Not quite a friend, certainly more than a stranger, Marcus had become a fixture in her days, a connection that had sustained her more than she had realized. On the 7th day of his absence, Eliza arrived at the diner for her shift to find a letter waiting for her. No return address, just her name written in a careful, deliberate hand she didn't recognize. "Some guy dropped this off for you earlier?" her manager said with casual disinterest. "Said it was important." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope, finding a single sheet of paper inside. "Eliza, I'm sorry for disappearing without explanation. Your kindness these past weeks has meant more to me than you can know. You reminded me of who I was before I lost myself, and more importantly, you showed me who I might become again. I've checked myself into a rehabilitation program. It's not my first attempt at sobriety, but it's the first time in years I've felt a purpose beyond simply surviving another day. That purpose is to one day be worthy of truly seeing your art as you have seen me. I've enclosed something that once meant a great deal to me. Perhaps it can be of use to you until we meet again. With gratitude, Marcus." Folded within the letter was a business card, worn at the edges but still legible. Marcus Donovan, Senior Investment Advisor, followed by the name of a prestigious financial firm. On the back, handwritten in the same careful script as the letter, "Call this number. Ask for Thomas. Tell him Marcus sent you." Confusion mingled with hope as Eliza stared at the card. That night, after her shift, she gathered her courage and dialed the number. The man who answered identified himself as Thomas Wright. When Eliza mentioned Marcus's name, a long silence followed. "How do you know Marcus?" Thomas asked finally, his tone careful, measured. Eliza hesitated, uncertain how to explain the connection that had formed between herself and Marcus over shared lunches and conversations on a cold city sidewalk. "He's a friend," she said simply. "He helped me see something important about my art." Another pause, then. Marcus Donovan was one of the finest men I've ever known. Before he lost his way. If he sent you to me, he must believe in your talent. Thomas, it emerged, was not only Marcus's former colleague, but also the owner of a small gallery in the arts district, a connection Eliza would never have made without Marcus's intervention. "Bring me your portfolio," Thomas said before ending the call. "Next Tuesday, 2 p.m. I can't promise anything, but I'll look." The week that followed passed in a blur of anxiety and frantic preparation. Eliza selected her strongest pieces, including several sketches of Marcus that captured both his current reality and the dignity that transcended his circumstances. The series of working hands, dishwashers, street vendors, construction workers that had begun before meeting Marcus but had evolved through their conversations about visibility and worth. When Tuesday arrived, Eliza found herself standing before a small but elegant gallery, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. Thomas Wright was nothing like she had imagined, younger than expected, with kind eyes that reminded her achingly of Marcus. "So you're the artist Marcus believes in," he said by way of greeting, his gaze appraising but not unkind. "Let's see what you've brought me." For the next hour, Thomas examined her work in silence, his expression revealing nothing. Eliza's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it, each moment of silence stretching her nerves thinner. Finally, he looked up, his expression transformed by what might have been wonder. "Your technique needs refinement," he said bluntly. "But your vision, the way you see people, the dignity you capture." He shook his head slightly. "It's extraordinary." Hope bloomed in Eliza's chest, so sharp it was almost painful. "Marcus always could see potential where others missed it," Thomas continued, his voice softening. "In investments, in art, in people." He paused, studying her. "He saw it in you." 2 months later, Eliza stood in the same gallery, surrounded by her work displayed on pristine white walls. "Unseen Portraits of Dignity," read the exhibition title. At the center, larger than the others, hung her charcoal portrait of Marcus, his eyes looking directly at the viewer, challenging them to truly see him. The opening had drawn a modest but enthusiastic crowd. Thomas had been generous with introductions, connecting her with local arts reporters and potential collectors. For the first time since arriving in the city, Eliza felt the faint stirring of possibility, that perhaps there was room for her vision in this crowded world of art after all. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, the gallery door opened one final time. Eliza turned, a polite dismissal ready on her lips, then froze, words dying unspoken. Marcus stood in the doorway, transformed yet unmistakable. Gone was the unkempt beard and weathered clothing. In their place, a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and a simple but well-fitted suit. But it was his eyes, clear now, present in a way they hadn't been before, that confirmed his identity beyond doubt. "Marcus," Eliza whispered, emotion making her voice unsteady. He moved toward her slowly, his gaze taking in the exhibition, lingering on the central portrait of himself. When he finally stood before her, Eliza could see the effort his composure was costing him, the barely contained emotion in his eyes. "You did it," he said simply. Eliza shook her head, tears threatening. "We did it. I wouldn't be here without you." "No," Marcus countered gently. "This talent, this vision, it was always yours. I just helped connect you with someone who could see it too." He paused, his gaze returning to his own portrait. "Though I admit it's strange seeing myself through your eyes." "Is it accurate?" Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the portrait with intense focus. "Yes," he said finally. "Somehow you saw the man I was trying to remember I could be." He turned back to her, his expression solemn. 107 days sober today, the longest stretch in 5 years. Pride swelled in Eliza's chest. "That's amazing, Marcus. One day at a time," he replied with the practiced humility of recovery. "But having a purpose helps. Which brings me to why I'm here." He straightened his shoulders slightly. "I'd like to purchase the portrait. And ... I'd like to become your patron." Eliza blinked, certain she had misheard. "My patron?" Marcus nodded, his expression earnest. "I made a fortune once, helping other people increase their wealth. It meant nothing in the end, not when I lost everything else that mattered. But now..." He gestured to the gallery around them. "Now I have a chance to invest in something real, something that helps people see each other more clearly." Eliza's mind reeled, unable to fully process the offer. "But why me? Why my art?" "Because when I was invisible to the rest of the world, you saw me," Marcus said simply. "You shared your lunch with a homeless man who had nothing to offer in return. And in doing so, you reminded me that I was still human, still worthy of connection." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "Your art does that for everyone it touches. It reminds us to see each other, really see each other, beyond circumstances and labels." Thomas approached them, having overheard the conversation. Marcus was one of the shrewdest investors in the business. He told Eliza, "If he believes in your work, that's no small thing." "I don't want charity," Eliza said, the words emerging more sharply than intended. "This isn't charity," Marcus replied, unperturbed. "It's an investment in your vision, your growth as an artist. And yes, in the commercial potential of your work." A small smile touched his lips. "I may be in recovery, but I'm still a businessman at heart. I believe your art will speak to people, that its value will grow. All I'm offering is the financial stability to create, without wondering how you'll pay rent or buy groceries." The mention of groceries brought Eliza back to their first meeting, the shared sandwich, the simple human connection that had set everything else in motion. "From half a sandwich to a patron?" she murmured, wonderment in her voice. "How did we get here?" "One small act of kindness," Marcus replied. "That's always how the most important journeys begin." 6 months later, Eliza stood before a new canvas in her studio, not the cramped apartment above the laundromat, but a light-filled space in a converted warehouse. Around her, works in progress leaned against walls and rested on easels. A coffee mug, her third of the morning, sat cooling beside her as she considered the composition taking shape before her. The phone rang, interrupting her concentration. Marcus's number flashed on the screen. "Have you seen it?" he asked without preamble when she answered. "Seen what?" "The review in the Times. Your exhibition at the Westfield Gallery." "Eliza, they're calling you a vital new voice in contemporary portraiture. They specifically mentioned the dignity you bring to subjects traditionally overlooked by the art world." Pride and disbelief mingled in Eliza's chest. The Westfield was a significant step up from Thomas's small gallery, a connection that had come through Marcus's tireless networking on her behalf. "I hadn't seen it yet," she admitted, her voice unsteady with emotion. "Well, clear your schedule for the next few weeks. Based on this review, you're about to be very busy." The pleasure in Marcus's voice was evident. "I told you your work would resonate." As they discussed the practical implications of the review, increased interest from collectors, potential commissions, a possible feature in an arts magazine, Eliza found her gaze drawn to the wall above her desk. There hung a simple photograph in a plain frame, Eliza and Marcus, standing together at her first exhibition opening. Two people whose lives had intersected through the simplest of human gestures, the sharing of food, the acknowledgement of another's humanity. "Marcus," she said, interrupting his excited discussion of pricing strategies. "Thank you. Not just for this, for everything." A pause, then his voice gentle with understanding. "We saved each other, Eliza. That's what connection does. That's what your art shows people, that we're all just one human gesture away from transformation." After they hung up, Eliza turned back to her canvas, a large-scale portrait commissioned by a local hospital for their main lobby. The subject, a night shift janitor named Elena, whose weathered hands and dignified gaze had caught Eliza's attention during a visit, another invisible worker whose humanity deserved recognition. As her brush moved across the canvas, Eliza thought about the strange, winding path that had led her here, how a half sandwich shared on a cold November day had somehow blossomed into this life she now lived. Not perfect, not without challenges, but infused with purpose and connection. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness contained within them the seeds of profound transformation. This she now knew with certainty. Her art would continue to bear witness to this truth, inviting viewers to truly see the humanity in each face, each pair of hands, each life often overlooked. And somewhere in the city, a man who had once been invisible was now helping make others visible through the art he championed, his own transformation continuing to ripple outward in ways neither he nor Eliza could have imagined on that first day when a starving artist shared her lunch with a homeless man, never suspecting how that simple human gesture would change both their lives forever.